Hello class, we're going to continue in chapter 40. This will be part 4, and in part 4 we will look at shareholders and some voting, some topics on voting. So first of all, some general things about shareholders. You've already learned shareholders are owners of the corporation. They are not authorized agents, but they are owners. And as shareholders, each is entitled to share in the corporate profits, which we call a dividend when it's issued by the board. Each shareholder has limited personal liability, so they will not be responsible for the corporate obligations and debts. Shareholders each are allowed to inspect the corporation's books or records. Of course, they have to have a proper purpose, but they are allowed access. Shareholders do get to vote whenever there's a fundamental corporate change proposed, and of course annually for the election or in the election of the board of directors. Shareholders can initiate the dissolution of a corporation as well. Right, now we're going to turn our attention to shareholder voting. All right, so shareholders vote when we talk about fundamental corporate changes. Those could include an amendment to the Articles of Incorporation or the bylaws. It could be the topic of a merger or the dissolution of the corporation. If the board plans to increase the number of shares, of course that affects the shareholders' interest, what the value of their shares will be, so they are allowed to vote on this. And if the corporation is proposing a sale of all or substantially all of its assets, which will essentially be the step they take before they go out of business, all right, shareholders get to participate in that as well, that decision as well. All right, so when we talk about voting, shareholders can agree with each other to vote together in blocks, so they would make a shareholder agreement with each other. Shareholders have meetings regularly. At a meeting of the shareholders, a quorum is required. Quorum is the minimum number of people that need to be represented or present in order for business to occur or for business to have any weight, all right, to be a legal meeting that can make decisions. You need a quorum. And shareholders may use proxies. Now, proxies, or proxy, the singular, is what we use when a shareholder will not be able to attend him or herself at the meeting and wants to have a representative attend in their place. So a shareholder gives a proxy to that representative. So prior to any annual meeting, what you'll see going on is the board of directors realizing that not every shareholder will make it to an annual meeting, but enough shares have to be present for a quorum. The board will then solicit proxies from the shareholders, and shareholders can decide then, if they're not going to be present themselves to represent their shares, to give their proxy to the board, a member of the board, or they could send their own representative. So that's what we mean when we talk about the proxy going out to the shareholders. We're looking at this idea of who will be represented and who will represent shareholders at the annual meeting. All right, now we're going to move on to letter D and take a look at the methods of voting. All right, the first method is easy to understand. 1 share, 1 vote. So each shareholder, if they have 1 share, 10 shares, 100 shares, they get 1 vote for each of the shares they own. Now, the second method takes a little explanation. This is cumulative voting, and cumulative voting is the method that is chosen to be used when you have a minority shareholder in a corporation, and it's been agreed that the minority should have some say, some representation on the board, and the way to give that minority shareholder that representation is to use cumulative voting. Your book has a good example in it, and I do have it loaded up, and I'm going to go out to it briefly just to show you, but I also have it worked out here on my slides so we can walk through it with a little more particularity. All right. So first, before I go out to the textbook, the cumulative voting method, how it works is that the calculation will be done this way, that we'll take the number of shares that a shareholder owns and multiply it by the number of open seats on the board, meaning the number of seats to be elected, the number of directors to be elected in that election. All right. So if there's an owner that has 3,000 shares and there's going to be 3 seats on the board, that shareholder will have 9,000 votes. Just to kind of give you some round numbers to work with. All right, I'm going to switch out here from my PowerPoint. Let me close this and go out to your textbook just so you can, see this in your book. It has some explanation. It also goes over the formula, which I just talked about, right now. And here is the example in your book. Let me just scroll back up a second. All right, it's example 40.5. If you care to go and look at it in your textbook, right? 40.5. Let me read through the example and then we'll work through it together. All right, a corporation has 10,000 shares issued and outstanding. The minority shareholders hold 3,000 shares and the majority shareholders hold the other 7,000 shares. 3 members of the board are to be elected. The majority shareholders' nominees are Alvarez, Beasley, and Caravel. The minority shareholders' nominee is Dovrik. Can Dovrik be elected to the board by the minority shareholders? Right. If cumulative voting is allowed, yes. All right. The minority shareholders will have 9,000 votes among them. Remember, we talked about 3,000 votes, 3,000 shares times 3, becoming 9,000 votes. All right. And the majority shareholders, they're going to have 21,000 votes. Remember, we're talking about 3 seats multiplied by 7,000 shares. We get 21,000 votes. All right. And those votes are going to be distributed among their 3 nominees, whereas the minority can put all their shares onto their 1 nominee, Dovrik. All right. So let me see. I just wanted to show you that they've worked out a chart here as well in your text. If you care to look at it, I don't want to open it up right now because it will be a little involved for me to do that. I'm going to switch back now, though, to my slides, and we'll take a look at it. All right, so pretty much we went over these facts already. This is what I read to you from the problem in your textbook. Just got it summarized on this screen. Let me go to the next slide. And on this slide, what you'll see is the outcome once the votes are cast. All right, so I made reference to how the minority shareholder has 9,000 votes and the minority shareholder or shareholders can put all 9,000 votes on their 1 candidate, candidate D. Whereas the majority shareholder will have 21,000 votes, but 3 candidates, and they can only manage to elect 2 of those 3 candidates, right? They would have to take 9,000 or 9,001 shares, okay, just to have more shares than the minority, more votes than the minority shareholder, and put it on candidate A. Put another 9,001 votes on candidate B, and those 2 would then clearly be the front runners. They would win their election. But where does that leave the majority shareholder? The majority shareholder would only have 2,998 votes remaining and could not elect candidate C. All right. So in all cases under cumulative voting here, the minority shareholders would be able to elect their candidate and have representation on the board, have some participation in the corporation. So, if you happen to be a part of a corporation, a small corporation with only a few shareholders, and you're outvoted all the time on this, when we use a 1-to-1, 1 share, 1 vote method, the cumulative voting method should help the minority shareholder. And you might look into that if that's the situation you find yourself in. All right, I'm going to create another video and we'll finish out the chapter here. This would be part 5, I believe, starting with some other rights that shareholders have.